Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast, where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting, simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. This is episode 84, and today I'm here with Katherine Woodward Thomas talking about Conscious Uncoupling. Katherine is the New York Times bestselling author of Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After and Calling in the One, 7 weeks to attracting the love of your life, as well as an award-winning marriage and family psychotherapist. Like a book club for a good book, if you listen to this episode and want to connect with us about it, come inside the Sage Family Village, where you get access to our Jamboree space, which has video versions of this podcast released early, vigorous discussions to deepen the learning for each episode, and question posts where you get to ask questions for these topics and experts, and I incorporate those into every episode. These videos and discussions are only available inside the village, where you can also connect with other uncoupling parents navigating the transition. So join us at sagefamily.com/village. And while you're there, take a look around at the brand new website. I've really poured my heart into a collaboration with a special designer, and I hope it resonates with you as much as it resonates with me and the rest of the Sage Family Villagers who've been weighing in throughout the journey. Conscious parenting is a core value here on this podcast, and we often talk about how it's not really about parenting so much as human connection, being in conscious, peaceful, respectful relationship with ourselves and the people in our lives. We've had an episode of this podcast on peaceful partnership, and now I want to extend this value or way of being and relating to others to uncoupling. And Katherine's book, Conscious Uncoupling, is a tremendous resource for those seeking a roadmap for this transition. Welcome to the show, Katherine.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's just an honor to be with you.
Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Well, I can start with my professional credentials, but what really qualifies me are my personal journeys. So, but I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm the author of the New York Times bestseller, Conscious Uncoupling, 5 Steps to Living Happily Even After, and also Calling in the One, 7 weeks to attract the love of your life, which I wrote close to 20 years ago. That came out. And I also train coaches, and I have online learning communities, and it's all really dedicated to the evolution of love and really our capacity to have gentle, kind, respectful relationships that you're talking about. On a personal level, I'm the product of a really nasty, ugly divorce, and then another really nasty, ugly divorce, and then another really... My mother was married 4 times by the time I became an adult, and none of them really went very well. And the most traumatic part was the divorces. So I know what it's like to be a child of people who are just unconscious, not bad people.
Yeah.
That's kind of in the throes of fear and fighting to survive and feeling angry because whatever happened was so unfair and so unpredictable. So I understand how badly this can go and the consequences of that, because I had really toxic relational patterns for decades until I figured myself out in my 40s.
Yeah.
And calling in the one about that. But so that's why I'm here. I have a passion for this subject, and I just already, really appreciate your audience so much and who you are for taking a stand for conscious relationship, particularly with kids.
Thank you. I relate to a lot of that. Like I I have been married for a million years to my husband, but growing up, my parents had been married and divorced, I don't know, like 8 different times. And they were all very unconscious. So just from like the child's perspective is like what I initially brought to this issue. And then of course I try to help support a lot of families as they move through this transition. So your book was a real like healing for my inner child to like see that there could be a better way. And then of course, helpful professionally as a resource to like point people to this into the direction of the work that you're doing. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. You challenge the cultural definition of success in marriage as happily ever after. Can you speak to why, if not longevity, then what?
Well, I'm kind of a closet anthropologist. So when I was going through my divorce from my beautiful husband, who's the one I called in for calling in the one, and obviously, most of us go into these relationships with our best of intentions. We never think it could happen to us. We think we're going to be the exception. I mean, some people know on their wedding day, this is probably a mistake, but I think the majority of us are, didn't really see it coming and are ill prepared for it. So even though I was a teacher of love and relationships and a psychotherapist, I was noticing how guilty I felt for ending the marriage. And I noticed that I felt like I had failed, and I felt really ashamed. Now, I'm sure there was a layer of that being, a teacher of love, but I think it's a pretty common experience for all of us. So late one night when I couldn't sleep, I started to research happily ever after, because I thought to myself, well, whose standard am I holding myself accountable to? Because if I really ask myself, is this an integrity? It is the right thing to do. Mark and I are not suited for one another. And there's a way that the marriage doesn't really fit anymore. And the most conscious, kind thing is to find a way that transitions it into a new form of family. So I knew that consciously. So I began to research happily ever after, and I discovered that it was basically created as an escapist fantasy back in, believe it or not, Venice, Italy, which is still kind of the romance capital of the world in many ways. And in Venice, Italy, in the late 16th century, there were 2 classes. One was, dire poverty, and then you had the privileged upper, the royalty class. And those who were privileged and in the royalty class were forbidden by law to marry a commoner. Now, if you were a commoner, your lifespan was less than 40 years of age. Children were dying. I think half the children born didn't make it to their 16th birthday. And you were locked into a predictable, miserable class structure. So for life. So when the happily ever after myth was created, we have to remember the conditions of the time. So even though people were in poverty, it was post-Renaissance. So everyone was very literate and they read. And that was what they did for entertainment. So when fairy tales were created, it just went like wildfire. And then from there, it spread around the world. But so we have to remember the cultural context. So very few of us in our world right now, where the lifespan is double what it was back then, if not more, are going to just meet one person, mate with that person, and stay with them for the rest of our lives. It's statistically a very small number of us. So inside of our kind of covert standard of happily ever after, or it was a failure, we haven't really learned how to separate well. And you and I can contest to that. Like human beings just left to their own devices, we kind of we're like an evolutionary hybrid. We go back into like 1,000 years ago. If you wandered away from your tribe, you would die. No, we're probably not going to die. We're probably not going to starve, out in the park somewhere, wandering around homeless for the rest of our lives if we separate from our partner. It's not the world we live in. So what's really happening in our world is statistically, most of us are slated to have 2 to 3 really significant relationships in our lifetime. Serial monogamy is the new norm. So most of us are slated to have at least one very big breakup in our lifetime. And after going through the war zone, not just with my mother when she was going through her divorces, but also then carrying those patterns forward and having had devastating divorces myself. When my former husband and I parted ways and did it with such elegance and thoughtfulness as a spiritual practice, I thought, okay, I'm going to write this down so that people can find the roadmap to how to do this well and protect not, obviously their children, but also their ability to grow in wisdom through the whole experience and their ability to find happiness on the other side of this and to love even more deeply because of what you've learned in the process.
Ah, that is beautiful. I love this. And I love this invitation to just define for yourself, like the meaning behind the experience of two people evolving in such a way that they're no longer the best fit in the current form, and to evolve into a new form, and that not being a failure, that just being an evolution. So I love that. I think that's beautiful. Why can pain and anger feel so big when we detach? What's happening from an evolutionary or a brain perspective?
Oh, thank you. Well, our brains are really hardwired to connect. They're not hardwired to come apart. And again, it goes back to thinking from, thousands of years ago, we really were quite dependent on each other for survival. So we do feel like still that we're in a high alert state, high threat. Our life can feel like we're fighting for our lives. Everything feels really, really like the stakes are so high, and we can get very caught up. And plus, we're completely traumatized. Nature hasn't really designed us to come apart. So we have to learn how to do this very, very consciously. But the very definition of trauma is that your system and your psyche are just overwhelmed. So you're overwhelmed physically, and you're overwhelmed psychologically, you're overwhelmed spiritually. You don't know how to process it. Most of us who are spiritual, we kind of have a sense that if we're good people, then good things will happen to us. We're protected. So when your world turns inside out and upside down, particularly if you were the one who is left or betrayed, or suddenly you discover something that you really didn't know was coming, it's what psychologists call a schema fracture. It kind of challenges your whole spiritual orientation to life, that life is safe somehow, or that there are any ground rules here. So it's obviously a very overwhelming experience. And the marriage itself, or the relationship itself, was a kind of container. Neurobiologists tell us now that we regulate each other's moods, and we go to our friends or our family when we're upset, and that's where we calm down. Sometimes, that phenomenon when you're upset about something, you call your best friend, and her voice or his voice just starts to calm you down and regulate you. So our relationships really are designed to be our safe space. So we're not only highly traumatized, we're at the throes of our biology, which is in this high fight, flight, freeze state. And we've lost our person who's regulated us, who's been our safe space in the world. And we've lost the container of the relationship, because the relationship has ground rules. We kind of know what the agreements are, and that becomes our orientation to life. That's what we cycle around. That's what we orient our lives and the rhythms of our days to. So you've lost all of that. So there's nothing really to regulate you. And that's when really good people can really, really do kind of obnoxious things like, throw all of his suits out on the front lawn and pour bleach over them. Or, I write about in the book, I write about a nice, lovely school teacher whose boyfriend left her for someone else, and she found herself keying his new BMW, in the middle of the night. I mean, we just kind of can do it. We maybe cyber stalk people. We do all sorts of things that we never would have thought we would do. It kind of brings out the worst in us at the time when we actually need to be the best of us to make good, wise decisions.
One of the things that you talked about in your book about why the pain and anger, can feel so big and how hard it is to detach, is that Like one thing that you see often is that people kind of hold on to that attachment on like the negative side of the coin. Because whether it's like positive attachment behaviors or negative attachment behaviors, they're sort of both on that attachment coin. So we can almost try to, unconsciously maintain that connection, that bond with this person when the positive is gone by engaging in some of those the negative side of that coin. Is that right?
Yeah, I call it soulmate to soul hate.
Yeah.
And it is moving from a positive bond to a negative bond. And I think it's a little trick of the brain to keep us highly engaged with that other person. Mm-hmm. Hate is a very active phenomenon. It's not neutral at all. And it's highly engaged in that person. You're thinking about that person all the time. You're ruminating on all of the things they've done that's so horrible. So you're having a very intimate connection with that person emotionally still. And so the goal of a conscious uncoupling is not to be vindicated for being right. It's not to finally get all your needs met. It's not even to become best friends, which I know that, Gwyneth and Chris kind of modeled out in the world of Paltrow, Chris Martin, that they're really great friends. I mean, sometimes people do really ugly things and you kind of get that there's a character problem with that person and that they're probably not a safe person to be connected to. And you have to formalize that relationship if you have children and find a way to work with that. But I think that sometimes because of the way it went out into the world with Gwyneth Paltrow and her former husband, Chris Martin, it kind of got characterized as some form of amicable divorce where you're best friends on the other side. Sometimes that happens, but not necessarily. What we're talking about is how do you get free? You get complete within yourself such that you're no longer carrying the residue of resentment. Your heart is fully healed. You trust yourself to love again because you know it's going to go better next time. The kids are not, having to live with the tensions of, your shoulders going up by your ears every time you hear that person's name mentioned. You're actually really free and you're really complete. And you might still have some sadness about it or some regret. You might have a little bit of wistfulness, like I wish I had done that differently. But you're not tortured by it at all. You're actually a better person because of it.
I find all of this so helpful, and I know other people will too, in terms of even just like if we don't have a roadmap for this, we've never seen, our own childhood experiences were so different. The way you're describing it all feels so clarifying and inspiring in the sense of like giving people a direction in which to point their compass, like sort of a bit of a roadmap for how it could be a trail that we could follow. It's hard to move in a certain direction if you don't know the destination. So what a beautiful gift that you're giving us to be able to have a destination, even to know to work towards it.
Yeah, thank you. That is my goal. It's a 5-step process. It kind of takes you by the hand. And we start with, finding emotional freedom, which is step 1, because you're anything but free. And you're frightened, you're guilty, you're angry, you're scared, you're like the gamut. You're depressed, you're discouraged, you're enraged. And maybe that was all in just the last 5 minutes. So, and you're hopeful.
How can we harness the energy of those difficult emotions and really transform them from like destructive to constructive?
Yeah, well, that's great. So, I was talking before about how the container of the relationship and the marriage was taken off. So, that's when all hell breaks loose, when you have all those big emotions and there's no container anymore. There's nothing that's kind of, constraining your behavior. So the first thing we have to do is, first of all, I really do kind of break down and explain that we are in a highly traumatized state. I do normalize that breakups happen, and it doesn't mean that it's a failure of love. A lot of good did come from this relationship, even if it's the wisdom that you have yet to gain, have yet to harness, but something good is waking up. And then I actually work with a couple of things. One of them to begin to ground us and get us back into a more reasonable consciousness. Because, you have to remember every decision you're making at this point in time, and usually there's multiple decisions to be made, you or your children, if you have them, are going to be living with that for many years to come. And all the consequences just at the time when we're apt to make really bad decisions because, our limbic brains are out of control and we're not thinking clearly. So whenever you have those big emotions, the first thing I do is I created a practice called the inner sanctuary of safety. And that's a practice where it's quite simple, where you're actually naming and mirroring back all of the big feelings that you're having. So I might say to myself, Katherine, sweetheart, what are you feeling right now? And then I listen to myself. And then I'm going to say, I'm feeling terrified. And I'm just going to mirror that back. I see, sweetheart, how terrified you are. What else are you feeling? Now, when I do that, as I do that, I'm getting calmer because now my feelings are contained. And there's studies that show this, that it's called affect labeling in the psychological domain. And it's just labeling your feelings. But it suddenly is that you go from them having you to you have them. And you can hold and contain them, and then you can begin to work with them more deeply. One of the ways that I give you to work with it, with these big, feelings, like let's say you're feeling rage. Instead of trying to repress that, you want to just mirror back to yourself, make space to try and hold that rage from a deeper center, witness the part of you that's experiencing that, and then go deeper and ask yourself, what's waking up as a result of this rage? Because rage is the reclamation of rights. I deserve something better than this, right? So there's something right about rage. So we're really looking to harness those big emotions, the word you used, to harness the big emotions and to transform them into the fuel for positive change. Because then when you realize, yeah, I do deserve something better than this, then at the end of step one, you say, so from this moment forward, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get myself into a better state so that every relationship from now on shows up with more respect. I'm going to tolerate less. I'm going to settle for less. I'm no longer going to settle for less. I'm going to engage my feelings. I'm going to share my needs. Whatever it is, I'm going to have healthier relationships where I feel honored. I feel respected from this moment forward. Now you've really set yourself up to heal well. So that's the foundation. That's just step one. Yeah.
Yes, those feelings are the energy that you can tap into in order to get you to that next place that you need to be. Beautiful. Okay, step two, reclaim your power and your life. How can we curate an empowering narrative that takes us out of victimhood? A lot of people can get stuck here.
Oh, it's very easy to get stuck here because probably the person you're angry at behaved incredibly badly. And we're hardwired for fairness. So we don't do well with that. When someone gets away with something or they stole something or they lied and we fell for it or they stole our childbearing years and all sorts of, reasons to be angry. So it's easy to craft a narrative that's really about the faults and the flaws of the other person. And you might be totally justified to do that. The problem is that it's not going to help you to integrate the trauma. And it's certainly not going to help you to ever trust yourself to love again. So a lot of us get stuck here because if, even if it was 97% the other person's fault, if you don't see your 3% clearly and know that you're going to plug up those holes and never do that again, you will not trust yourself to let someone into your heart again. And I've seen this countless times where people have spent a decade, 2 decades alone, never really getting close to anybody ever again. So it's important to look at the more subtle ways that we tend to throw ourselves under the bus. And maybe it's what I call a pseudo safety strategy from childhood, where you somehow had some old trauma where relationship was fragile. And in order to try and secure relationships, you kind of take a shortcut, and maybe you are a people pleaser. you disappear yourself and kind of are a chameleon to try and get into the other person's world, make yourself indispensable. So we do all sorts of kind of covert things. We dismiss our inner knowing. We minimize the red flags. We don't speak up because we want to keep the peace. We don't want to set the other person off. So there's all sorts of ways that we think are kind of subtle. But when you have a big breakup, you recognize finally that the consequences to those behaviors are severe. And they're almost unmerciful. Mm-hmm. And so in a way, it's kind of like the shadow side of life, where life is going to teach us, the shadow side of the universe, that we're going to learn hard lessons. And we're going to have to face the consequences of what really happens when we're codependent, when we give our power away to another person, when we organize around the weakest parts of other people, where we don't tell the truth because we're trying to keep the peace. All those things that we tend to do. And so it's very important to look at that, to take responsibility for that, and to say, I was afraid that person was going to be mad at me, so I didn't really set boundaries. I kind of let myself be a doormat. So then you have to say to yourself, what am I going to do differently moving forward? What will I never do again? What will I always do from this moment forward? And you name it. And then you do it with your sister, your mother, your coworker, your boss, your neighbor, whoever is in your life right now. You start doing that so that you build that muscle, you learn that skill, you master that capacity so that you can trust yourself to be close to someone in the future again and create greater health.
Nice.
In that relationship.
You become that person that you want to be now. Like you don't have to wait till the next romantic relationship comes along to do that.
Exactly. You don't want to wait till the next romantic. You want to practice with everyone that you can. Yeah. And people sometimes say to me, Rachel, what if the person that left me is the best person for me? Right? That sometimes people feel like that. Well, how do I get over that if I still feel that they're the best person for me? And what I say to them is that you're going to need to outgrow who you've been in this relationship and become a healthier version of yourself. Because the healthier version of yourself would not be interested in somebody who is duplicitous and who didn't choose you.
Yes. Ooh, that was good. Just taking a minute to let that one simmer. That's good. Okay, step 3, break the pattern, heal your heart. What is a source fracture story, and how can understanding it help us break the patterns that are not serving us?
Oh, thank you. So source fracture story is my term for the original break in your heart. Your father left or your mother was negligent. So it was kind of it was either maybe an acute trauma or a developmental trauma, but in some way in early childhood, one or both or all of your caregivers let you down. And what the source fracture story is the meaning that you made of that disappointment. I am alone. Everyone will always leave. I can never get my needs met. And that's the part of you that might be 4 or 3, or maybe even pre-verbal. I worked with one woman once whose mother had tried to abort her when she was a fetus in the womb and was unsuccessful. But this woman always had this deep sense of not being wanted, just being rejected by everyone. And she walked with that, as a way of being in the world, which of course then generated more of the same. Because from that center of I'm not wanted, she did this weird thing where she was very actually aggressive in her mannerisms because she always felt like people were going to leave at any given moment. So she had to really talk fast and loud and get them to pay attention to her, which of course, if you think about it for a second, is a setup for other people to push you away and not want to be with you.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy through that narrative.
Exactly. So why I bring this up now in this stage of the process of uncoupling is because we're trying to get to, breakups are what I call an insult to identity. And they tend to drop us down emotionally in our bodies, even somatically, into that old story. There's kind of a collapse into, oh, see, I'll always be alone. I think the anthem for that is that wonderful Gilbert O'Sullivan song that Diana Kroll does a great, amazing job on, called Alone Again Naturally, or Alone Naturally or something. Yeah, Alone Again Naturally. It's a one song of the year a couple of decades ago. It's brilliant, but it's like a tribute to the false center, where you just kind of go through a deep disappointment and then you just collapse into the old narrative. Now, the problem is that what we're trying to do is get you through the grief and the loss of the breakup in a healthy way. And we're all always going to feel grief. Even if you're the one who left and you've been processing for a while, there are losses here. So you're going to go through, maybe it's before you leave, but you will go through a period of grief when you have loved somebody, you've invested in that relationship. It's human to feel sad at the end of the relationship. Where we get into trouble is with what psychologists call complicated or prolonged grief. And the prolonged grief, from what I have noticed in working with thousands of people now, is really when we park our car in the garage of a false narrative. See, no one will ever love me, or see, I'll never be good enough. Other women are better than me. You know, the men I date are better than me. They're superior to me. I'm inferior. And we kind of collapse into that meaning. We can stay inside that false meaning and start to generate life from that center. And wherever you're centered at the level of identity is where you're making your choices from, where you're taking actions from, your decisions are coming there, your body language is filled with it. It's informing everything you do. And everything you say, even when you're trying to hide it, which most of us do. But it's how we feel, right? So it's how we feel. So one of the things that I have people do is to notice the meaning that you're making of the breakup. And it's not meaning doesn't live like in a conceptual realm. It really lives in your body. So you have to kind of go down into your body. You close your eyes, you take a breath. Where am I feeling the pain of the breakup in my body? Usually it's in the heart or in the solar plexus. Sometimes I've had people like right in the small, right between the shoulder blades, like they've been stabbed in the back. Some people in the throat. I tend to go to the lowest part in the body that you can feel it and ask yourself, what's the I am narrative in the center of the pain? What's the story I'm holding about myself and about my relationships with others? I'm invisible. Nobody cares about me. I'm not safe. Other people have ill intent. They're going to hurt me. And then you want to ask yourself, how old are you, sweetheart? And that's where you really see it. The through line of the narrative that you are creating. The problem is that if you stay in that center unconsciously, you will generate more of the same. So we have to wake you up from that narrative. And one of the ways we do that is by having you again connect with that younger you and course correct the consciousness, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. It's not that you had a sentence for the rest of your life. You'll always be alone. Your mother was just an alcoholic, sweetheart. I'm so sorry she was negligent, but I'm here. You can say to yourself, I'm right here. I've got you. I love you. So you have to start to really wake yourself up from the narrative and create a new narrative, which is, not every relationship works out. And it doesn't mean I'm destined to be alone. As a matter of fact, I'm learning from this, and I can go on and apply what I'm learning and have really great relationships moving forward, right? So you have to wake yourself up and bring yourself into a more adult center. And then the icing on the cake in this step is what I call a soul-to-soul conversation with your former partner. And what you can do with them is just bring them into your imagination and imagine that, there's a ritual, there's candles around you. If you're spiritual, maybe you could put angels around your circle. And you say, my soul wants to have a conversation with your soul. And then you introduce yourself to that person from the truth of who you are. Because they're holding you in that false narrative, probably because you've enrolled them into that story. We're always informing other people who we are. So if I have a story, I'm not good enough, there's all sorts of ways that I'm going to show up as I'm inferior, they're better than me. So then when they leave because of that, it's validating the old story. So you have to go in and do this correction on a soul level. And you don't ever have to talk to them in person. Sometimes it's not safe to do so, but you can actually say, I'm so sorry I ran that wounded, traumatized version of myself. It's not actually who I am. I'm a woman of great value, as you are a person of great value too. And I would appreciate it if you would remember that about me and think of me in that way. So we can't control what they're going to do or not do, but I will tell you that there are a lot of studies done, some of them at Princeton University, about how consciousness is relational and non-local consciousness. And I've seen great breakthroughs from soul-to-soul conversations.
Yeah, you included some great examples in your book too, or at least one in particular I remember that really resonated with me. I love it. I love when someone, because I'm such a geek and I love to like look at the, neuroscience and look at what the research shows. And my background is as an MFT too. And anytime someone can take me a little step farther into like a little more spiritual in a way that like I've come along for the ride, I always feel like so grateful, to get out of my head a little bit and into that space of like intuition and just inner knowing. And I appreciate when someone can bring like both pieces because it allows me to like receive it more fully. So I definitely did through your book, and I am again through this conversation. So thank you for bringing all of that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, so the next step, become a love alchemist. How do we set an intention for a positive future for all and create conscious completion?
Yeah, beautiful. Ooh. So the first 3 steps of the 5-step process are all internal, if you notice. We're not talking to our partner yet. We're not, creating a custody plan or negotiating who gets the house. In a perfect world, we do this, before we go to court or we start separating assets, just because you want to really be in your rational, wise adult self, and you don't want all of those unprocessed feelings to get involved. However, the process can be done in a nonlinear way at any point. I've had people come back and do conscious uncoupling 10 years after the breakup because they were still incomplete. But number 4, step 4, becoming a love alchemist, it's probably my favorite step because it's about recreating the future. Now, granted, if you have been left and you've been highly traumatized by that, you really don't want a new future. You kind of want the future you've just lost. Okay. But there is a way. And and the other exception is if somebody was really horrible to you, you might want nothing ever to do with that person again. Like, I do not want any future with that person. So we're working with this concept that studies have really shown that those of us who have a future in mind when we're going through a great trauma like this, a great loss, that even intellectually, if we know that one day we will be happy again, and we are kind of leaning in to find that future in any kind of, even small increments, studies show that those people do much, much, much better getting over their breakup. So this is the step where I invite you to stretch. And certainly if you have children, this is an easy one for you because you could make it as simple as my intention, and I'm going to try and enroll my partner in this too, I'm going to invite them to take it on as well, is that our children have happy childhoods. That's our intention in this divorce. So we're going to do our separation in a new way that allows them to be free, to feel connected to both parents. Because, children are homeless emotionally. They get emotionally homeless when the parents are at odds with one another. I kind of like the bird nesting, the idea, but it's not a substitute for doing the work because the physical home is not the home. The home for children is the relational field in the family. That's their home.
That term, emotional homelessness, that's the first time I had ever heard it was when I was reading your book. And I had to like set down the book for a minute where I was like, oh, wow. Oof. Like, I don't know that I've ever had a term that like described my experience of my childhood as well as that term of being emotionally homeless with like divorced parents and step parents and ex-step siblings, and I definitely felt emotionally homeless. So even just having that language was like profoundly helpful for me. Sorry, I know you were in the middle of a train of thought. I just had to say I love that.
Really profound. I love that term too. And I love telling parents this, that it's not just about, renting a studio apartment, 2 studio apartments and doing the nesting thing. If you and your partner are not, your uncoupling partner are at odds, are resenting each other, there's unprocessed rage that's getting covertly acted out between you, that is going to, your kids are going to feel that. So, so we do want a clear field. You want to clear a field with that person where there's not festering resentment. You're not waking up in the middle of the night, with a bad dream of yelling at that person, or driving down the freeway at 80 miles an hour. Oops, 65 miles an hour. And find yourself telling that person off in your head, you really don't want 3 years after the breakup, right? So you really don't want any of that residue. You just want to be free. So in step 4, we do self-forgiveness practice, and we do a clearing of the air, which some people can do and some people can't do. And, but I do like to educate people on what actually completes a past hurt and restores wholeness and integrity to the relationship, because it's not just an apology. I told you I was sorry, right? That doesn't actually complete the hurt that was caused, even if the hurt was intentional. And even if you think your former partner's a little crazy for even being hurt about that, if you think they're overly sensitive or wasn't what I meant, or I'm so, that goes in the category of, thank God we're getting divorced. This is good, because it wasn't really a match for me to be with somebody so sensitive. So, but what will actually clear the field, and again, it's worth doing if you have children, is to take the time and say, okay, why don't you tell me your top resentment of me? And maybe we'll write down our top 3 resentments of each other. We'll make a little list, then we'll deal with one at a time. And you invite the person to just tell you. Now, you have to get that there's no right or wrong. Terrence Real, who wrote, I was just reading it, The New Rules of Marriage. It's right here on my desk. He talks about how there's no objective reality. Love. And if you're but I'm right about it, but you're crazy. No, he came at 5 minutes after. It wasn't quarter after. We get into there's some objective reality, and we've got to get into agreement about it. Yeah. You have to give that game up, because it really isn't possible. And my friend Polly Young Eisendrath, who wrote the book Love Between Equals, is equally wonderful. And she talks about each of us being in our own little snow globes. So when you're going to complete something, you have to get that the person before you is probably a little crazy, but they see the world completely different, and they have a completely different account for how things happened and why they happened the way they did. And what you're looking for is to clear the field for them. So you're inviting them to tell you what happened. And with the best of your ability, you're finding those mature parts of you that can say, I'm really sorry, I get how much that hurt you. As opposed to, but I only did that because, or, well, I did that because my mom did this. And you're going to explain your whole history in psychology, as though if they understood that about you, then somehow it would get complete. It doesn't. So it's just going and apologizing. It's acknowledging the impact on them. And then it's making an amends. Okay. You know what? You're right. I really minimized your need for us to be on time throughout our whole relationship. I do apologize. I see that really created a lot of anxiety for you, where you felt like you couldn't count on me. And I am going to really make a concerted effort to pay attention and to show up, not just on time, but 5 minutes early. That's you say that from now on, when it's my turn with the kids, starts to lift the residue. That's how you disappear the residue. So you're setting an intention, you're disappearing the residue. The other part of step 4 is you start being generous with each other. And I think that we know that we have to do nice things for each other when we're in a marriage. You almost have to double it when you're getting out of a marriage. You have to be really super considerate, because now you're investing in this new form of family, and you understand the biology that we're prone to go to war. So you're just doing things to counteract that. And, just whenever the opening arises. I mean, this whole thing started because when Mark and I were at the mediator's office, Mark surprised us both when it came to the royalties of my first book, Calling in the One, because it came up. Mark was entitled to 10% of those royalties for the life of that book. And he said, absolutely not. I wouldn't dream of taking Catherine's royalties. She worked so hard on that book. And it just started this culture of kindness between us. And then we started to kind of do our best to outdo the other and who could be more considerate. So that really created a great atmosphere for our daughter to grow up in. She's never had to navigate, incompletions and tensions and rage and all that kind of stuff that's very typical.
Nice. Okay. And the last step 5, create your happily even after. What are some of the components we should incorporate in building a new life for ourselves?
Well, so first of all, you're going to have to deal with friends and family because they're all going to want to take sides and they're suddenly going to confess they never liked that person anyway. So they're going to start to villainize. Even the most conscious of us, it's just instinctual. We want to protect our friend. We want to support them. And it's kind of an unconscious instinct that we all gravitate towards. But it's going to be important to not divide your community, particularly if you have children.
Yeah.
So you do your best to be, very conscious in the way that you share. And you might even say, like, if you're angry, look, I'm really angry at my former partner, but I don't want you to get too caught up in that. I'm committed to working that through. I want to have a conscious uncoupling. I want to do this well for the kids. So do me a favor and be nice to them and pray for us both. That's what you can do, that we make this transition well. You also need to clean up the agreements that the relationship is founded upon, because all relationships are a series of agreements. And, just the covert agreements, like I'll never love anyone more than I love you, or, you're my best friend and you drop everything when I'm in trouble. Or, you're my one and only sexual partner. So there's all these agreements now that are up for grabs. They're kind of, floating around in the field. If you don't actually make them conscious and then reset them, even if you're only doing it in your own mind's eye, you're in danger of kind of holding on to confused expectations. So that's when you get really enraged when you hear that they're flirting with somebody. You see them at a party and they're flirting with someone else and you go into this rage. So you want to kind of prepare yourself for all the changes that are coming. And you can do that by becoming conscious of the agreements and renegotiating them. I am no longer your one and only, true love. I am a love. I am someone who you shared something beautiful with, but you are free and I am free. Sometimes we do rituals where we speak that out loud, but you can always do it, again in a soul to soul or just even for yourself. And you want to also be very mindful as you're deconstructing the structure of your lives to set everyone up to win. Usually there's downward mobility for both people when they're separating. That's normal. That's nothing to be afraid of. If you notice the happily ever after myth, people are always lifted into great wealth. So we're kind of coded for upward mobility, and we get very cranky when we have to go through a period of downward mobility. So, it's just to normalize that, to remind yourself that this person is not your source for money. They're not your source for abundance. Your creativity is. There's money, there's many opportunities to make money. So one of the things that I did, that Mark and I did, is we actually moved into an apartment building, and we both lived in the same building so that the daughter could go freely between our two apartments. Now, I did not like that at all on a personal level because I like living in a house. I felt the downward mobility of that, but it was a structure that we created really to give her an opportunity to not have to choose and to not have rigid structures around, she can only see mom on 2 days a week and on every other weekend. So we wanted to create that for her where she had more flexibility, and we could do it. We had a relationship that was strong enough to be able to weather that. And we worked together in that way.
That's so beautiful. I live on a really small island, and there's a family there's a girl that my teenagers are friends with, and the parents are divorced, and they each have a house on the island. So they can kind of run back and forth, between the two houses. And when I heard that, I was like, gosh, that's so cool. Like, that's such a beautiful thing. It's sort of like a geographical representation of what you're talking about the family expanding. So that's beautiful. I love that. You've mentioned ritual a few times. We have such big splashy rituals for establishing a union. Are there any rituals for uncoupling? I think you've talked a little bit about sort of how we have all of these like agreements and stories kind of floating in the universe. And it's helpful to bring them into your consciousness, bring them into the forefront, kind of even into your body, and do something about them, do something with them. Do you have any ideas for us?
I do. There's there's as many rituals as there are people who want to create rituals. But the truth is, I'm an idealist, and I wrote of some rituals in the book, and then I have handouts if somebody wants to write in and get a copy of a bunch of rituals that they could engage.
Awesome.
So I'm kind of an idealist, and I want everyone to, have this kind of conscious completion. You could invite some of the core family members who have been involved in the relationship to come and witness as you complete your vows and create new ones about how you're going to co-parent with integrity. At the end of the Conscious Uncoupling book, I have something called the Conscious Uncoupling Creed, which kind of lays out how you're committed to doing things. So you could read some of those things and borrow from that and the pledge that you're making. That said, not a lot of my clients have done that. And it's a tender thing. Most people do it as a personal ritual. Maybe they have a couple of friends there, or one friend, and they light candles and they have pictures and they speak it and they're witnessed by someone. Maybe they do it alone in their own spiritual practice, or they've done it alone with an advisor or a conscious uncoupling coach. And then the one that's more common are the ones that are created in a kind of almost, I want to use the word clandestine way, not necessarily rituals, but it's almost like you invite everyone over for Thanksgiving, and everyone's just around the Thanksgiving table. So you have family, you have friends, you have your former partner, you have the kids. And then you might make a toast before the meal, you make grace and what you're thankful for, but you might stand and make a toast. You say, I just want to be, acknowledge, I'm grateful for all the years that we spent together and these beautiful children that we share. I'm grateful for the love that we were able to share together and all of the gifts that we were able to receive. And I want to just thank you for transitioning. And so everyone's there to bless that. But it's a public witnessing, because relationships are both private and public.
Yeah.
And, and so people are doing things on social media now, which kind of is a different form of ritual.
Yeah.
They're acknowledging each other in words and presenting united face and encouraging people to reach out to them both. So there's new ways to do it, but it is important to mark these transitions in a healthy way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for all of those ideas. And I'll include a link for people too in the show notes to inquire with you about some more of those ideas. But before we sign off, I had one last question for you, because I've been asked this a lot. Can we do this program ourselves, even without our partner's participation or cooperation?
Most people do. Most people do. And even when they do it together, they're doing it at different paces.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a program to separate in a healthy way, in a conscious, healthy way. And sometimes people want to do it together because they want to still hold on to the togetherness. They don't want to separate. And so we have ways of supporting people to do it when they do it side by side, concurrently like that. And it does give them a shared language and shared goals and shared values. That's really important. It can kind of go off the rails a little bit when one person wants to go to war. Yeah. But even in that case, you can do a lot to minimize the damage done. Even if the other person's like crazy, narcissistic, punishing, you can still do a lot with just even one individual intending to do this well, because there's ways that I talk about, particularly in step 4 with the generosity piece, and disarm someone and to de-escalate the tensions and create a more friendly atmosphere between you, where they're less apt to kind of rake you over the coals and take everything they can.
Nice. Yes. And it's just on this podcast, we talk a lot of work. We center kind of around gentle parenting, and we often talk about that really it's about like how you show up for yourself and for the people you're in relationship with. And it's not really dependent on anyone else doing any particular thing or even agreeing with everything that you do, because you can't control another person. You can invite another person, you can give them a copy of the book.
Influence them.
Yes, you can
influence them by how you're being.
Yes, you can influence them. You have an effect on them. And yet it's really about the work that you're doing within yourself.
Well, and they might be, soulmate to soul hate. So that's their way.
Yeah.
People go into blame, shame because in a way, it's a shortcut. It's kind of nature's shortcut to get us to maybe distance quickly, but there's a big cost to it because it doesn't really get complete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, the show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast84, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. So what are your resources for people to dive deeper into this topic, Katherine?
Well, I love that you said you would make available the rituals, and I can give you a link to that where people can download those rituals. And also, we have a Conscious Uncoupling starter kit, and I am doing a lot of Conscious Uncoupling stuff in the next few weeks. I'm not sure when this is getting aired, but we do things in cycles because I have these 2 teachings. One is Calling in the One, and one is Conscious Uncoupling. So we're about to go into a big Conscious Uncoupling launch where we have a free course that we're doing for people, and then that could lead to an actual course that you can do as an individual, and there's also a way couples who are uncoupling can do it together. So
nice. Okay. And I don't know when this comes out yet, but I have the link to the starter kit. If you want to send me a link to the course, I can share about it in my community too, while the timing is right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll definitely do that.
And we'll definitely link to your book, which I loved. Obviously, if somebody is moving through this transition, it would be immensely helpful. But even, like I said, as someone who just was a child living through a lot of divorces, it was really powerful and healing and helpful somehow just to know like there's this other way, and to sort of almost my inner child being validated, like that it could have been, my soul was yearning for something real, essentially, is how I felt like after I read the book. So I found it a quality read for everyone across the board. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us today, Katherine.
Thanks for having me.